Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar presented by myself, Heinrich Smith, for Enterprise Works. We are just going to cover what the new features are with SQL Server 2016 and then what you can do with Conductor4SQL, which is the product that we've developed to even leverage those features further. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We do have the Q&A, so if you are having any trouble with technical issues during the session, you can just ask. We do have someone who can assist you with that. Also, if you have any questions regarding anything we cover in the presentation, you can just ask that as well. We do have people that will answer that more to the end of the session. And then if you would please also just complete the survey that is right next to the webinar frame. That'd be great just to give us some feedback on what we can do next time and possibly assist you with some of the features that we cover today that we won't have time to cover right now. Okay, so that's all the housekeeping stuff, and then I'm just going to get into it because we don't really have all that much time. Okay, so the presentation is get the most out of your data with SQL Server 2016. So what we are, firstly, this is my information. I'm Heinrich Smith. I'm a consultant for Enterprise Works, as I mentioned, and I'm also a developer and the pre-sales lead for Conductor4SQL, which I'll get to in a bit. So there's our company information. I will actually give it to you at the end again if you would like to contact us to discuss anything we did talk about in the session today. So just a quick background. As you know, I am a consultant, and one of the cool things about that is I do actually get to go to a lot of different clients in different industries and look at their Microsoft SQL Server landscape. And by having that exposure, I can actually have a good idea of exactly what people use, what limitations, what struggles they are currently having. And we at Enterprise Works, and obviously Microsoft would also love to show you this, we're very excited about SQL Server 2016, and more specifically the SP1 release that was released late last year, because it included even more fancy features that you can use in your environment. So just quickly what we're going to cover, we're going to say what is new in SQL Server 2016. Then I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to Conductor4SQL, and then the four features that we're actually going to dig into a little bit today is compression, query store, partitioning, and change data capture. As I mentioned, if you have any questions that we don't cover here, please feel free to ask or contact us afterwards, and we'll be glad to answer those questions. Okay, so the first thing I'd like to say is there are two categories of new features that we are going to cover. The first category, as you can see over here, is the features that are brand new, never seen before in any edition of SQL Server. So the most exciting one to us is the query store, which we will actually be showing you in the demonstration today, so I'll get into that a bit later. The other ones we're not going to get into, but I would like to mention them because they are also quite exciting. So always encrypted is pretty much self-explanatory. It just means that your data can be encrypted permanently, and the cool thing about this feature is that the encryption key is actually not stored in the database. So for the guys who actually know SQL, you know that SQL encryption isn't really that hard to beat if you know the proper channels. So not only is the encryption permanent, it's also more secure than previous encryption. Then we've got stretched database, which is just a technology that allows you to split your database between on-premise SQL and then SQL in Microsoft Azure. I definitely recommend reading up on that because if you are trying to move into the cloud but you don't want to do a lift and shift of your whole environment, this is definitely a good way to do it. Dynamic database masking or data masking. That's just a nice feature to prevent specific people from seeing sensitive information they're not supposed to see. So just a picture in your head, you do a select all columns from a specific table. The columns that you're not supposed to see are just going to have abstracted data masking on it. Temporal data, this is actually quite cool. This means you can have historic views of your tables. So all the changes that you make is actually written to a separate history table, and then at any time you can go and query that and see what changes were made. You can incorporate that into a backup or a data recovery strategy. Definitely read up on that. And then another cool thing is that you can actually natively have JSON, just like you could have XML before. You can now store and query JSON in your databases. Okay, so those are all the brand new features. The other thing I would like to mention is the features that since SP1 was released have been included in the standard edition of SQL Server that used to only be included in the Enterprise edition. So some of these are in-memory LLTP. If you've got high transaction volumes on your transactional systems, this will be very useful. Partitioning, we're actually going to get into. Some of you might have worked with it in Enterprise Edition. Compression and change data capture is the same. It used to only be in Enterprise. We'll cover them. And then finally, you also have database snapshots, which is just another way of having a historical view of your entire database. So if you have any more questions about the ones we aren't covering, please go read up on it or ask someone on our Q&A channel. Okay, and then, as promised, just a quick introduction to what is Conductor4SQL. Conductor4SQL is a product that our company, Enterprise Works, developed in-house. And what it is, it's a bulk management and a data synchronization tool for Microsoft SQL Server. So it helps organizations manage the SQL Server landscape. And typically, our clients have anything from a couple hundred to a couple thousand, up to 20,000 instances of SQL Server. And with Conductor, they can then manage that whole environment with just a few clicks and centralize all of the information very efficiently. Some of the features that I'll show some of them to you, but just so you know, an overview, we've got security, we've got auditing, we can help you with governance. It helps you with task automation, so script executions. Helps you with standardizing your whole SQL environment, and it has real-time or near real-time data synchronization. As we get into the demos, you'll probably see some of these features and you'll understand. It is a hard concept, but as I showed to you, you'll definitely see the power of it. Okay, so I'm going to jump right into the first one. The first feature we'd like to discuss is Query Store. So if you are tuned into this webinar, I'm pretty sure somewhere along your career you've had to optimize your SQL queries, or actually in retrospect try and resolve performance issues without having traces or profiler running. This usually is quite impossible to do if you want to do it in hindsight. But with this new feature, Query Store, you can actually store the history of your query plans. So every time it executes, it actually stores the information around that query and the plan that it uses. And then with that information, it's got a bunch of cool things you can do with the data. So for example, and this is what I'll show you, you can then identify your most expensive queries, or the queries that use the most of your resources. You can also identify if queries have degraded over time, and if you did make changes, you can actually force the usage of old plans if the new plans aren't working the way you wanted or expected them to work. So I'm going to quickly show you a demo. Just jump into my SQL Management Studio. Okay, so I've got a couple of client instances, which we refer to them in Conductor4SQL, and then my central instance. So for the first portion, I'm just going to show you some databases on my central instance. I've actually created a database called Query Store Demo, very creative. And in this, I've got a stored procedure called Query Customer, and it takes a parameter of age. So it gets all my customers with age 30. So when I execute this, I can actually then go into my central query database, go into the Query Store Demo, and you'll see I get this new object called Query Store. So If you want, you can read up. There are some back-end DMVs that you can query to get the information, but that's not really needed because you get all these neat visualizations that are just built into SQL Management Studio. So I'm going to go look at the top resource-consuming queries, and just because I cleared it right before, I only have a couple, and that just makes it easier for the demo. I don't have to sift through hundreds, but you can actually search for specific queries if you really wanted to as well. Okay, so here is my actual query text. The query that execute stored procedure actually executes. It just selects a bunch of values from a table where the value equals age. So as you can see, it does a key lookup because it does have a primary key, but then it does an index seek. That's not really ideal for large volumes of data. So what I can do, and sometimes when Management Studio likes it, it actually will suggest a execution or an index that you can add to increase the performance of this query. But I'm just going to go do it manually and create an index on the value field. I already added it. Sorry, that's just Kremlin. No, I should have seen that. It actually uses the index age. Okay, so I skipped a step, but that's fine. I'm going to create another index, and this is just a covering index because it does the key lookup, and it does use that index, but I actually don't want it to do a seek. So I'm going to use my include index over here, and this one shouldn't exist. Great. It isn't that big of a table, so it shouldn't take too long to create this index. Okay, and then I'm going to execute the same stored procedure again. When I go and refresh this now, you will actually see, if I go look at you'll actually see that it's exactly the same query, but now I've got two plan IDs. So the first one was the first execution, as I mentioned, that had the lookup and the seek. And here's my second ID, and because I added the include, it's just doing a seek. So this is, I mean, you can see just from this, it's very, very easy to determine if your queries are using the correct execution plans. If you've got theoretical plans in your database, you'll be able to pick them up quite easily. And then, as I also mentioned, if for any reason I decided this execution plan with the specific index isn't working for me at the moment, I can just click on a previous plan and force it. And if I go back over here and I run this again and show you the actual execution plan, remember the last time it ran, it actually just did an index seek. If I run it again, you'll see that it actually does the lookup and the seek again. Okay, so that is basically the query store. There are a bunch of other things you can do with it. This is just an introduction. I would definitely recommend get a version of SQL 2016, play around with it. So just quickly, I mean, if you are a SQL person, you definitely do see the value of this, but if you don't really get your hands dirty with it, but you do manage a team or you are reliant on the data that this team provides, these are some of the benefits. So long-running queries, they'll be a thing of the past, especially during month ends or year ends. You'll find that you've got queries that take very long, and it's very hard to tune these because they only occur every now and then. And unless you're actively monitoring the resources and the exact queries that are going on while they're happening, it's very hard to go back and see exactly what you can do to optimize it the next time it runs. So it analyzes your pattern, so it can actually see you are executing queries at these times. If you need to add a new process in your environment, you'll be able to look at the pattern and find an ideal place for this new process with just a glance. And then also it reduces the risk of upgrades. So if you are upgrading from previous versions, one of the big things that scare people off from upgrading is the fact that your queries sometimes lose the execution plans after the upgrade. So everything is running smoothly, you do the upgrade, and then everything just runs horribly. So if you've got this feature, then you can then very simply identify all the queries in your environment that if they did lose the execution plan or the indexes, you can identify them and fix them within hours. And it's not a let's see what breaks and then go fix it. So it does reduce the risk of your SQL upgrades. And then let me just explain to you, with the help of Conductor4SQL, how you can then roll this out to your whole environment very quickly, and then utilize the query store on all of your SQL 2016 instances without having to enable it on each one. So just to hop back into over here, that's great. Accidentally closed the application, sorry. So this is Conductor4SQL, by the way. Just logging in very quickly. And like I mentioned earlier, I've just got 4 clients installed on this environment. So you can see I've got client 1 to 4. But just use your imagination, in a production environment, this can be, hundreds or thousands of clients. So just very simply, what I can do is I can send a query, and you noticed I actually said send to all. So all of the clients I've got installed as Conductor clients, I can just click send all. And what I can also do is I store all of my scripts centrally. So I've got the script to enable query store on all my databases called retail POS, which is deployed everywhere, and it just enables the query store and sets some parameters for it. Now imagine you had to send this exact query to 1,000 stores individually. That would take you quite a while. With Conductor4SQL, and this holds true for any script or any T-SQL that you need to execute, it's as simple as send to all, pick or type your script, and submit. Just one last thing to mention, when you do save your script centrally, you can actually set security on it. Other people aren't allowed to edit or view it. You can categorize it, so it's very simple to find here on the left, as you can see, and you can give it descriptive names. And with the case of a query, you can actually, if there is a result set, save it to a table centrally to immediately consolidate all of the results, and then you can just get cracking with putting that into a format that the end user can consume. So I'm going to submit that. And it's done. So now at all 4 of my clients, I've got query store enabled. I'm not going to go in and look at them individually, but just very quickly, if I go into one of my clients, you can see in the retail POS I've got query store now as well. Okay, so just a quick overview with Conductor4SQL as well. Not just true for query store, but it is definitely a nice thing to use to roll out query store, this new SQL feature to your whole environment. Great, so if there's any questions around query store, please ask them in the Q&A and someone will definitely answer it for you. The second feature is compression. So this is one of the features that used to be available to enterprise users, but I think, as is the case with most people, if you see the price tag on an enterprise edition for a server with any reasonable amount of cores, you probably get a little tear in your eye. So we are quite excited that compression now has come to standard edition, and in our existing client base, we've actually encouraged them to move their standard edition up to 2016 so that we can utilize this. So just a quick overview, there's 2 types of compression you can, and this is on a per table level. You can have row level compression, and that just takes care of all the white spaces, and the nulls and zeros don't actually consume data. So just the base compression, and I would actually suggest reading up on this because it's very fascinating. Then you get your page compression, and they actually swap out common prefixes and suffixes later on to save even more space. So I'm going to show you a demo just of exactly how much space you gain through this. Just jump back into Management Studio, and I've got a creatively named database again called compression demo, and one of my tables is called sales. So there's a built-in procedure you can run to estimate the savings that you get on row level compression and page level compression. And I'll actually also be able to show you what the size of this is at the moment. So at the moment, the size of this table is 119 megabytes. With row compression, it estimates that the size will be 74. So not quite half, but we're getting there. With page level, however, I'm going from 119, 120 to 54. That is less than half. Now, obviously, I can't guarantee that you will save half of your space, but that's why we actually do have this stored procedure, and data types and the amount of columns, all these factors will actually determine how much space you are going to save. But just do yourself a favor, run this stored procedure and see if it's worth it for your organization, which I'm pretty sure it is. The other benefit of having compression is because we are storing the data in less pages on the file system, SQL doesn't have to do as many I/O reads to the disk to retrieve the data. So it means less I/O, which in my experience is probably the biggest limiting factor in an environment. If you go to most people, you'll see that the CPU and the memory is sitting in idle, but the disk is maxing at 100% all the time. So what compression does is it actually offsets that, and I'll actually get to it in the benefits. It offsets it to utilize more CPU and memory in the compression phase, but your disks actually have to do less work. So I'm just going to now put page on this. Let's do a space used before, enable the page compression, and do a space used after to just prove the concept. And there we go. So before it was 119, now it's 54. Just imagine over 100 tables, if you can save half the space, how much space your organization would need. And even though people say disk is cheap, this is a very quick and simple way to save money in your organization. So just a couple of benefits. As I mentioned, it reduces the cost of having disk space, because many times it's not just about buying a new disk, but buying a proper storage controller that allows for expanding disks quickly. You don't need that anymore. You've got improved I/O, which is the most common bottleneck, as we mentioned, and it helps you distribute your workload between your CPU, your memory, and your disks a lot better. And then just quickly to show you in Conductor4SQL how we've started utilizing this. So as I mentioned in the feature set, Conductor4SQL actually allows you to do real-time data sync. So as preparation, I actually set up data sync for a couple of tables and a couple of databases. And we've actually got a couple of different types of data sync. The one I did for the retail POS database is what we call real-time sync, and this is based on triggers. Now we'll get to that in a bit, but this just means that as soon as a change happens on your remote instance, that change is immediately sent up through dedicated first-in, first-out queues, which are resilient. So even if the network communication is down at that specific point, your data will eventually come to central anyway. So data sync is a very cool feature if you do need to do real-time analysis, real-time reporting. So as I mentioned, I set up on retail POS, I set it up, and just to give you an idea, on one of my clients, if I go look at one of my clients, I can see that I've got 5 million rows, and it's using 234 megs of data. I've got 4 clients, so you would expect at least 4 times this amount of, definitely 4 times the amount of rows, but at least 4 times the amount of data being used. And in fact, it'll be more because we add additional, just to show you, so just to show you, we actually add 2 additional columns, one called client ID and one called C4SQL client database name. And this is because we consolidate the data we sync centrally as the data comes in. So there's no one-to-one, and then you have to run ETL on your central database to actually consume the data. We consolidate it already, and then these two columns are what you use to distinguish where the data actually came from. So having said that, as I mentioned, we've got 5 million odd rows, and we're using 200 and something megs of data. You would expect with these extra columns and the indexes on them, we're using 4 or 5 times the amount of data. But because I did compression on this, even though the rows is 4 times the amount, the space is not even not even 4 times. It's 3 and a bit times the amount of data, and that's because I added compression. So even though Conductor has this really cool feature of bringing all the data from all your clients back to central, with the use of SQL 2016, you don't even have to provision enough space or as much space to keep all of them, all of the data at central. So we think that's a very good match of having the availability of all your data, but not having to have ridiculous amounts of disk. Okay, so that's it for compression. Once again, if you've got any questions, please ask. Then, partitioning. So partitioning is another one of those features that used to be available in Enterprise. And basically it just allows you to divide your indexes and tables between different file groups. These file groups can then be scattered among different disks if that's what you want to do, but I'll show you in a quick demo. We're just using one disk with partitioning, and it already has great benefits. So the reason it has benefits is operations like truncate to rebuild index is then performed on a partition, meaning a file group or a specific file instead of the whole table, which drastically improves the performance. So let's jump into the demo quickly. I've got my database, and just to show you what the partitioning looks like, and I'll actually show you the rows as well. So I've got this table called sales, and I've got 6 partitions. So the first partition is for client ID, anything below 0 and 0, then 2, 3, 4, 5, and then anything 5 and upwards. So those are my partitions, and that's on the table called sales, just sales, and then I've got another table called sales no, which is this exact same table, but it doesn't have partitioning. And just to show you in the select, I've got 10 million rows for each client ID 1 to 7, so it's just a simple group by. So for every client ID, I've got 10 million rows of data. So what I'm going to do first is, from the table with no partition, I'm going to delete all the records where the client ID is 2. Okay, so I'm going to kick that off, and this is usually where I have to put in filler because it takes quite long. But I just want you to imagine in your environment, and this is definitely something I've seen, deletes take a long time when tables become quite big. So especially when people are reporting off data and they want to do archiving of old data, that usually takes quite a long time, especially if you've got a bunch of columns in the keys, or if the disks are slow, that might also be something. And just by adding partitioning, we've seen great improvements with that. So 36 seconds is what it took to do that delete on client ID 2. I'm going to do the same thing on the sales table with a partition, but instead of saying delete where client ID 2, I'm going to just truncate the table for the partition 2, which, remember, just relates to client ID 2. I'm going to just click execute, so you see I'm not lying, and that was immediate. So 36 seconds to immediate, and I'm just going to run this query again, just to show you it's not smoke and mirrors. But basically what we're looking for is that client ID 2 doesn't have any rows anymore. And for the first one, that holds true, and we're just waiting for the second one to come back. But there we go, it's 1, 3. So for both, all the records for client ID 2 is gone. The one took 0 seconds, the other one took 36. So you decide the performance benefit of this. So just some benefits of this. The first one is maintenance tasks and archiving tasks as well take a lot less time than they previously did. It allows you to transfer and access subsets of data quickly, because you can also do partition switching, which is definitely something you should look into. We just don't have time to cover it in this demo. Your query performance will improve. And the other cool thing is, if you look at the way the SQL engine works, even if files are on different drives, it actually, when it does a query and retrieves the pages, it actually can only access one drive at a time. So even if you do have fancy storage solutions that use multi or smart disk usage, you're actually still only using one disk at a time. But if you scatter your files, the partition files across different drives, even if you don't have a smart disk solution, you actually can access more than one drive at a time. So not only with compression can you reduce the amount of space needed, now you can actually also need less complicated solutions to access your data quickly. And then just very quickly, I'm going to show you Conductor. It's basically the same thing, but I just want to show you, once again, we've synced a bunch of data for a database called manufacturing. And for those of you who cringed a little bit when I mentioned triggers earlier on, we actually have other database or data sync solutions, exactly because we know that some people just can't afford the performance hit of a trigger, even though it is vastly optimized. We do have scheduled sync solutions, and then we've got our enterprise solution, and we'll actually get into how that works a bit in a bit. But so I've synced all my manufacturing databases with enterprise sync, and what we've seen is, if you need to stop syncing for a specific client, or you need to do maintenance on this, remember it's a consolidated data set, it's central. So if you have a 5 million row table or 50 million or 1 billion row table at the client, you can imagine how big this becomes at your central. So you don't want the issue of waiting for hours to delete. So I'm just going to show you, I did exactly the same thing. This time I've just got my 4 clients, remember, client IDs, and I'm going to delete from the 1. This shouldn't take as long, I'm hoping. And this just means that getting your data in near real time, getting it to central, being able to utilize it for reports or analysis, doesn't mean you have to spend hours figuring out how you're going to maintain this. Things like reindexing, things like deleting is going to be a quick thing. So exactly like in the demo before, when I delete, it takes 21 seconds. When I truncate, I think I forgot to actually add the partition. No, I got my names wrong. So I actually deleted from the table that doesn't have the partition as well. So I'm just going to truncate partition 3 so you can see the difference between deleting and truncating anyway. So now you'll actually find that client ID 3 and 2 is gone, but the one took 21 seconds and the other one took 0 seconds. So there's a nice example by mistake on the same table, the difference between the truncate on a partition and a delete with basically the same logic. Okay, great. And then the last feature is change data capture. So basically what it is, it records all the inserts, updates, and deletes that you do on a specific table. You enable it on a database level and then on a table level. And once again, this is also one of those features some of you might be familiar with because it used to be an enterprise, but now with standard edition, it allows you to, this fits nicely into your data recovery solution or auditing solution. The possibilities are endless. Whatever your need is, you've got the data, you can do whatever you want with it. So it's completely asynchronous. It means that if I do the insert, the update, or the delete, unlike a trigger that we mentioned earlier, the performance isn't actually altered. because all the changes are actually written to the log just as usual, and then if you are familiar with replication, it's exactly the same log reader that reads those logs and puts them into what we call change tracking tables. And then from there you can see what your inserts, your updates and your deletes were, including the values that changed, and then you can do whatever you want with that. So it makes records available to see what changed. It's easy to consume because it's still in SQL, it's not in log format or some weird binary file format. It gives you the ability to revert your unwanted changes, as I mentioned. And then you can actually perform additional tasks. You can have specific things to look out for in these change tracking tables, and if they do occur, then you can actually kick off an additional process or workflow based on that. And then it also has the ability to show you just the net changes. So one of the things I've seen, I work quite a bit with retail systems, is tables get updated instead of just the fields or the columns that need to be updated. All values for all rows get updated, and the net result is actually just one row, one column of one row changed. But if you go look, the statement actually updated everything to itself. So what CDC allows you to do is actually see the net changes and throw out all the other updates that are basically just spam. So just to give you a quick demo. Sorry, just hold on. I think I actually forgot to run that setup step, but don't worry, I've got my scripts ready in case of that. My scripts actually, I think I forgot the piece where it actually enables it. So I'm not then going to show you this because I can show you in the demo that I'm going to show you for Conductor4SQL, because the enterprise sync I mentioned earlier, we actually just utilized CDC. So that's actually the reason why it's called enterprise sync, because previously it was only available on enterprise editions of SQL. But now we with Conductor, we can sync standard edition, and this is definitely the most optimized and the type of sync that has the least performance impact on your environment. So it's definitely the one we've always punted, but as I mentioned, the price tag that comes with enterprise edition usually is a great barrier for most companies. And now with standard edition SP1, people can utilize this great Conductor4SQL feature just with standard edition. So I'm going to just show you. Remember I said manufacturing, we are syncing with enterprise sync. Now if you go into my system tables in the manufacturing database, you'll see that there are a bunch of CDC tables. So one of the things, and that's what I wanted to show you in this demo, is my work in progress table now has a change tracking table as well. And every time I do an insert, an update, or a delete, it gets written into here. So maybe, and forgive me because I'm doing this completely on the fly, but maybe I'll just quickly edit something. And then we should actually see it in this change tracking table. There you go. So operation 1 and 2 is actually an update from the old value to the new value. Then you get 3 and 4, which is an insert and a delete as well. With Conductor, we've got fancy ways of picking this up and converting them into basically applying those same changes at Central. But as I mentioned, you can then do whatever you want. You can say, oh, this value changed, please just write the query to change it back to the old value. You can write this away to a permanent storage as a means of auditing, or you can have some mechanism that monitors this change tracking table and based on specific values, kick off additional workflows. you know what will suit your environment. And you can imagine that because this is integrated into our product, we actually do have a bit of knowledge around it. If you do think you can apply this to as a part of a solution in your environment, please give us a call or pop us an email, and we'll definitely give you some advice on that. Okay, so those are the features. I'm just going to quickly recap. So CDC, it helps you track your changes without affecting performance. It helps you keep history of all your changes and integrate them into businesses. And it helps you revert unwanted changes, which is something you usually need to protect in your environment, because you do every now and then get a cowboy DBA or someone who has too much access that accidentally does something they shouldn't. CDC is a great way to then negate the effect of that. Okay, so those are the features I've covered. I'm sorry I had to rush through them, but we'd rather finish a bit early than keep you guys for longer, as it is working time. Just a couple of things we want to mention. So most of you, I imagine, aren't using 2016 yet. And just some of the common concerns that we come across when we do make the suggestion of going to 2016. The biggest one, unfortunately, is if your vendors aren't supporting new versions of SQL. Unfortunately, we can't really help you bridge that gap, but we do suggest take it up with them, find out if they've got an ETA on that, because as new versions of SQL is coming out, they're just making immense improvements, and it's definitely in your company's best interest to be on the later versions. And as I mentioned, if you are on enterprise and you are using some of those features, you can now go to standard, have that big saving, and it's basically just because you did an upgrade. There's no additional work on your side. The other thing is risk. So obviously, if you've got a system that needs to be up 99.999%, it does take quite a bit of planning to make sure that you do the change over as effectively as possible. The cost, depending on what licensing model you are on, you could have a cost issue, but we definitely recommend either talk to us or to someone at Microsoft about overcoming that. That really shouldn't be an obstacle. And then oversight, that's also something where people have done upgrades in the past, but things went wrong, so they missed some specs that aren't supported in new versions, or they didn't plan for a specific compatibility issue. And then the other thing is if people are on really old versions, so the example we use is 2008, but in real life we've actually seen people who still use 2000. So that is also definitely a hurdle, because very rarely can you jump many versions at once. Some best practices from our side, we can just recommend using the Upgrade Advisor. I mean, it's a tool you get with the installation media. It helps you figure out exactly what you need to do, all the additional steps you need to do before you can upgrade. Make sure you do a proper upgrade audit, so you get all the information, all the compatibility issues that there might be, and also have a proper rollback plan, because the reality is sometimes you do have oversight, or there is just something you couldn't anticipate. You need to roll back to your previous version. Just make sure that your rollback plan is in place. But we also would like to let you know that we can help. We've done this quite a bit. So if you do want to upgrade to 2016, but any of these concerns ring a bell with you, please contact us and we'll have a chat to you about getting upgraded. And then I also just want to mention some other features of Conductor4SQL that unfortunately we also couldn't cover here. As I mentioned, it's a tool for administering your SQL environment, and then also bringing and consolidating your data to central. Some of the other features is auditing. So everything that's done through Conductor4SQL is actually audited. So it's a great way, if auditing is a requirement of your organization, it is there. Auditing for execution outside of Conductor4SQL, so anything that's done through Management Studio or services. So that's all of your creates and alters, basically all DDL events. We can audit that for you. We've got reports, so if you need to quickly figure out what exactly is going on in your SQL landscape, so how many databases do I have, what are my backups looking like, do I actually run checkDB frequently, how many logins do I have? We've got built-in reports for all of that. What am I missing? We've got metadata compare. So if you have standardized databases implemented many times, so a typical scenario is manufacturing, where you've got an ERP system, or retail, where you've got a point of sale system. We can help you make sure that your environment is standardized and there aren't any rogue stored procedures or rogue changes in tables made in the environment that can potentially bring that specific branch to a grinding halt. Yeah, and then we've also done very cool stuff at our clients with Conductor4SQL custom solutions utilizing these different features. So if you do have a large SQL landscape and you are having a hard time administering it, please also reach out to us, and we'll come show you how Conductor4SQL might make your life easier as well. Okay, we finished a bit early, but thank you for everyone who's dialed in. I hope this was a learning experience to you. I hope you are excited about SQL 2016. I hope you're excited about Conductor4SQL, and I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks.